Game to Change, Excellence in Learning Design, Creative Techniques. At Game to Change, we believe learning should be an active and creative experience. Holistic understanding. Your environment is unique and so are your people. We listen and design with you at the center. Experiential learning. People are not robots. Our designs focus on engagement and interactivity. Outcomes driven. We measure what we deliver to drive consistency and continuous improvement. As we progress through our series and the 4 diamonds, we now dive into the second diamond, Create. We will be covering topics such as what is your creative type, the creative process, and 7 creativity hacks. Without further ado, let's jump into part 2 of our Learning Design series.
Okay, so welcome everyone who's joined us today. It's the 1st of October, very windy 1st of October. We really look forward to hosting you in our second webinar session, which is really about creating, and we've taken the creativity techniques on how to create better learning design, and to obviously introduce my other panelists. So I'm going to introduce you to Daniela Sounds, who really is a creator by nature. She is also interested in psychology. You know, she does a lot of creative work outside of Game to Change as well. So hi, Daniela. And then to my right over here, we have Simon Rourke. And Simon is really coming from board game specialist, but also looking at gamification techniques. So he is the Game to Change creative engagement specialist. Simon's passions are board games, Lego, and he's got a little bit more of the analytical side with golf. So welcome to Simon. He's also going to be driving this and putting up all our videos and making sure we stay on time. So welcome. And the 3 of us are going to be hosting you over the next 40 minutes. So to kick off, what are we going to cover? So firstly, we're going to look at what is creativity. And I think just with a focus on learning design, why do we want to be more creative? Then we're going to look at your creative type or your creative thinking style, which is really interesting. We found a great tool from Adobe. There's obviously many of these, and we're going to unpack that a little bit more. And I'm sure some of you might have seen the actual link in the email, but we'll send it to you afterwards as well. And then we're going to look at the creative process. So it seems like a bit of oxymoron when you say creative and process, but there are certain stages in which something starts, emanates as an idea, and actually manifests in either a new way of thinking or new products. And we're going to chat about that. And we're going to link it back to learning design. And it's really useful in terms of knowing where, based on your thinking style and the process, where you can come stuck or where you can stop your creative process. And then finally, Daniela is going to give us 7 creativity hacks. So for really those times when you just feel like you can't think of any new ideas, or you need to solve a problem and you just need to get yourself unstuck, these are really great, and they open up your thinking. So that is for today's series. And I'm going to kick it off with what is creativity. And creativity, I mean, when I've done the research around it, I'm also a creative thinker. There's so many different variants of creativity. And I've just put a whole host of these. I came up off a blog spot, and you can see it. It's so diverse. So Seth Godin, a well-known marketing guru, says this might not work. So that's kind of a little bit not what we expect from creativity, but failure is actually an important part of being creative. And then we have Liz Gilbert, who says it's taking inspiration. It's a relationship between inspiration and human beings. And then obviously Pam Slim says, creativity, expressing your ideas in a full contact, full color way. So creativity is very vast. Creativity can be the juice that leads to innovation in business. Creativity can also be in terms of how you live, or creating things that are beautiful, aesthetically pleasing. Creativity can also be a key part of problem solving. So it really is broad. And I think when we look at creativity and we focus on learning design, for me, and this is just my opinion, and I'm sure there's other opinions out there, it's really about how do we do things in a better way? How do we bring in new ideas? How do we push the needle forward in terms of both our learning design, our learning delivery, how we work as a learning team? So it's like, it is the juice that is constantly driving improvement and new ways of thinking. So to kick this off, I'd like to engage with everyone out there. And I know we all have things that stand in our way of being creative, or even taking something to fruition from an idea. And I know with myself, when I was working on my own, my biggest challenge was I had great ideas. I'm very much a divergent thinker. So I can come up with ideas, I'm full of inspiration. I always got stuck as soon as I had to make it happen. And that's where I learned to bring in other people who had that focus. So I thought I'm going to just do a quick poll. It's obviously anonymous. And we just like to get a sense of what your biggest creative challenge may be. And you'll see it's coming up on the screen, and we've got, the first one is finding a creative idea or inspiration. Second one, converting my idea or inspiration into something practical. Third, getting others to understand my vision or idea or inspiration. So that's the communication. The next might be having the expertise to deliver on my idea or inspiration. And that's like taking that idea and make it happen. Then we've got getting feedback on the validity of my idea, and finally identifying and addressing challenges or weakness in my ideas. So that's quite an interesting one, because we often think just because we've got a good idea, it doesn't have to be interrogated and looked at from a point of view of what could stop it from happening. So interesting. We've got some results coming through. Someone put finding a creative idea or inspiration. I had 2 people who are saying converting my idea or inspiration into something practical, valuable, or relevant, definitely. Getting others to understand, so that's the communication. Quite a few people saying having the expertise to deliver on my idea. Yeah, very, very important, because it's all great having an idea, and if it doesn't come to life, there's really no point. And then getting feedback, and also identifying and addressing challenges. So great, it looks like we've got everyone answered. So I'm going to actually just share with you the polls and give you an idea of where everything is sitting. So you'll see the top 2 challenges, creative challenges, was sitting with our second one, converting my idea or inspiration into something practical, valuable, or relevant. Very interesting. Today we're definitely going to take you through the process and the stumbling blocks of what could stand in the way of this. And then the second one is having the expertise to deliver on my ideas or inspiration. I think that's one of the biggest challenges. How do we pull in the right people to make that idea happen, and to actually bring it into the world and make it useful and relevant? Great, so that's very interesting to see where everyone is sitting at. So what we wanted to kick off with, and I'm going to hand over to Simon, is understanding a little bit about your thinking styles in terms of creativity. And Simon's going to go through, this is from my Adobe Connect. So thanks, Simon. I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Deirdre. Yeah, so we are looking at creative thinking types. So people don't think creatively the same. Your artist and your musician and your painter are all very different in the way they come up with their ideas and the way they put their ideas into execution. And it's the same in any creative field. So Adobe Create has a wonderful little quiz. I think it takes about 20 minutes to do, which you can run through, and it kind of gives you a profile of who you are. Now, of course, depending on what time or day or how you're feeling, your kind of profile will most likely change. but you'll kind of get a good idea of maybe what your creative thinking style is, or how you come up with your creative designs. So you have the artist, the thinker, the adventurer, the maker, the producer, the dreamer, the innovator, and the visionary. So we have them all here, very nicely colorful. And again, we're just taking this from Adobe because we think it's a very nice, valuable resource. The artist is very much what you would expect. This is the kind of the baseline of a creative thinker. They are capable of bringing their ideas and concepts to life, but they might struggle to actually bring or come up with those ideas. So they're much better at putting those ideas into practice, so to speak. You'll also find that all these types have someone that they work well with. So in this case, the artist works well with the producer, and it might be an idea to get you and your whole team together and go through this quiz and then identify the strengths and weaknesses in your team. So you can pair people up with the artist and the producer. So the thinker is very much more focused, less about the making of things or the making of your creative ideas, and more about finding the ideas for them. They spend all their time thinking of the creative design process and less time actually doing the creative design process. Then we have the adventurer. The adventurer plays with ideas. They are happy to try out many, many types of things. They're happy to try out a product over and over again to find the perfect tool or the perfect solution, but they'll struggle to narrow it down. They really want to try and get as much out of everything as possible. Then, of course, you have the maker. The maker slowly builds on one idea, piecing it together until it becomes something concrete. The difference between the maker and the adventurer is, while the adventurer is widespread, the maker is much more narrow focused in its design process. The producer is very much the producer role that we know when dealing with our clients, trying to get projects off the ground or trying to make sure projects run smoothly. The producer is not necessarily coming up with ideas, but he has a vision, or she has a vision, to make sure that that idea continues along the whole path line. Then, of course, we have the dreamer. The dreamer is this much more high thinking. So whereas the thinker is grounded in reality and understands the practical solutions to these creative ideas, the dreamer thinks much more on a higher level in terms of the emotional connections, the imagination part of the design process. The innovator, which I think is what I kind of got given when I did the quiz. This is someone who is able to take new ideas or able to see a creative solution to something and then work on that. So in my case, I'm very good at kind of pairing ideas together, looking at one product that I have and thinking, how can we take it and kind of augment it in a solution that we might need for another product. So that's kind of what the innovator does. And then finally, you have the visionary. The visionary is able to see problems and come up with multiple solutions to them. They want everything they look at, they think, how can they implement it into their own creative process field? So you have your 8 types there, and knowing what your creative style does helps you further develop your creative process. You know, if I know that I'm an innovator, I know where my weak sides are going to be. So what do I mean by weak sides? Well, there are things that can hold you back differently depending on what maybe your type is. So for the artist, it's actually being confident enough in your work so that you're not bogged down by other people's ideas. The thinker is great, again, at thinking, but to actually take those ideas now that he's come up with and put them into the real world, that's much harder for them. The adventurer, like you said, loves to try out many different types of things, but they struggle when they want to commit to one single project. The maker enjoys making risks. Well, they actually suffer from taking risks, and they want to make sure that their project is precious to them, and as they slowly follow all the steps, so they kind of risk in that regard. Then you have the producer. Obviously they're trying to run through the whole design process, so they will often sometimes lack the drive or the creative spirit that a lot of other types have. You have the innovator who, like me, I can think of the ideas and I can think of maybe the solutions we can have to those ideas, but to actually implement them for me is quite challenging. And then you have also the dreamer. They struggle taking that idea down a step from the high thinking to the more rational thinking that maybe the thinker does. And then finally, the visionary is they struggle to see the right solution. When they're presented with all these other options, it's difficult for them, very much like the adventurer, to narrow down that solution. So yeah, those are creative types. Again, take a look and see what you might be later on in the afternoon. That's a very nice way. And then yeah, go around the office and get other people on.
Correct.
Cool.
And
So Deirdre.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because, I mean, we actually may have more than one of these. We definitely have a dominance in one side. And I think as we tackle more creative projects and bigger, more complex problems, it really becomes about bringing a team together and leveraging off those different strengths. So I'm going to now take you through the creative process. And just before, there's many different ways and different insights to this, and it's not necessarily I've represented the creative process linearly, but obviously it could be going backwards and forwards, but this is something that seems to be the 4 common elements of coming up with an idea to actually landing something. And the 4 steps, and I'm going to briefly go through them, later on I'm going to go into more detail, is preparation. And this is essentially once you have that idea or that inspiration which ignites you, and this is where the visionary may come in and see an opportunity or something that can change. It's how you're going to take that either new way of thinking, that idea, or solving a problem, how you're going to approach it. So the preparation uses both convergent and divergent thinking. So critical thinking, but also ideation and coming up with new ways. Once we've decided this is what we're going to tackle and this is how we're going to approach it, we go into incubation. And incubation is a really interesting phase, and I'm going to share with you, incubation is where you do the deep diving to say, is this idea valid? Is this idea relevant to my environment? And you'll see different types thrive in different environments. So incubation is about then actually landing it. And the interesting thing with the creative process is it's also a learning process, because you take an idea and you are mapping it into your view of the world and how this idea can either improve a situation or a new product that adds value. So there's a lot of learning that happens in this phase and not a lot of output. And then we've got illumination, and I think this is really summarized by that Archimedes, and you have Eureka when he was in the bath. It's not always those big moments and big aha moments that you crack the code on a law of nature, but often they're the little nudges that say to you, this is something that's on the right track. And between incubation and illumination, often you'd need to go back to preparation because the idea is just not feasible enough, or too many things require you to revisit it. So illumination is where you start to see the light and you start to see how you can implement this. And then finally, in experimentation and evolution is where we actually start implementing and we start making this a reality. And this is where your technical expertise, your building comes in. And if you think of anyone's familiar with agile development, particularly in software, is it's very much iterative. And the reason why it's iterative, because it is part of a creative process. When you're building an app or anything else, it's incredibly complex. So you start with an iteration, you experiment, you get user feedback, you evolve it. And it's a series, it's a series of these iterations. It's very seldom that you first try out, you get that amazing product. It's always honed and refined. And sometimes you might need to go back to preparation or incubation. So those are just generally the 4 phases of a creative process. And you're probably now thinking, well, what is this how do I fit into it? And before I bring in and deep dive into each process around learning design, I want to bring something really interesting and I found very relevant, because I think creativity is a very unknown. You know, when we step into creating something new, we are stepping into the unknown. We're doing something new and we're exploring new territory, which is exciting, but there's also a lot of, it's an emotional roller coaster. And if anyone's ever done anything new or tried anything new, you will probably relate to some of the emotions that come with it. You know, we all have a degree of hesitation when we put something new out into the world. And this IDEO, Mood Meter, IDEO is actually the company who really has spearheaded design thinking, which is a creative process for business, or one of the key creative processes. Is they looked at a whole set of design teams, and they looked at these design teams and they actually tracked their progress of taking an idea into fruition. And this was done over a number of years with a number of different teams. And they kept on finding, and they did a mood meter where people's emotional state, or where the team's emotional state was at. And it was very interesting, because as you start out in research and observing, and you'll see it's above the dotted line, which means there's a high emotional state, but it's also you're dealing very much in the concrete world. So you've got an idea, you can imagine, the visionary can see where it's going, so can the innovator. It's when we step into taking that into an insight and digging deep, and this is where incubation comes in, and we're really starting to understand this idea, is that where teams and people hit a dip. So energy is very low here. It's very much an introspective exercise. And what can happen is, as you go into this dip, you've got to push through. And this is where you might see obstacles. The idea might seem, you might have self-doubt. And it really is about pushing through to hit that aha, or getting those nudges to say you're on the right track. And then prototyping, designing, prototyping your first product, which can be quite nerve-wracking, because you don't know how your user base is going to react to it. And then from here, once you get into prototyping, you get feedback and you move into the more concrete state where you actually see your idea. There's a lot of validation if the idea is working how you thought, or even if it's got a bigger impact. So this is very interesting in terms of emotions. And they often say that a lot of teams get stuck right at the bottom and can actually abandon projects right at the bottom. And I think this is really important when you look at creativity and bringing into your learning design and you're doing something new, is not to be disheartened and abandon things, because you're going to have those struggles. And I think particularly where we're sitting in business, where it's very output driven, this introspection is important for the creative process. So that's just really interesting to look at, and something to also guide you as you take your team into creativity and creative design, and if you're doing something new in your learning design. So I'm now going to go into a little bit of background around each of the phases and just what type of thinking styles work well in each of these phases. And you can also see how people can complement you as you're doing something new, something different, and you may be pushing your creativity into innovation. So the first phase that we start with is preparation. And as I said before, it is about inspiration. So having the inspiration with the good planning and the critical skills. So you almost need a complement of different creative thinking skills. And you see that I've put here that normally the creative thinking styles that excel here, who the innovator, the visionary, the adventurer, who's very experimental, and the dreamer. So they see the bigger picture and the patterns and what could be. They drive the inspiration. I think at this stage, which I just wanted to also say, is you do need to have rational, critical thinkers who help take that idea and inspiration and actually have an approach of how you're going to take this forward. Because I think that's you know, we think of being creative as just being in this open-ended, but if you don't have a plan to support it, this is where it can fall flat. So this phase is around preparation, and this would happen, I mean, if you're looking at learning design, this would happen in your analysis. So when you're understanding your user, when you're looking at what you want to achieve, when you're saying, well, how was it done before? How can we do it differently now? So this is where the inspiration comes in. If you apply design thinking to learning design, this would also be where you're doing your user analysis, your empathy, canvas maps, really generating that to say, how do we not only design things different, but maybe how do we deliver things different, and what can we do to really move the needle in our learning design forward. So from preparation, we move into the next stage. And as I said, this is where you're going down into the dip. And this is incubation. So you now have your idea, you've got a plan. You've either done your analysis, you've done your user analysis, you've got your idea, and you now want to take these ideas and you now have to go and implement or try and figure out how are you going to build these new ideas, new way of thinking into your current environment or into how things have been done or what's already existing there. And I think this incubation is really key because a lot of the times we've got to work with a lot of legacy systems, we've got to work with current constraints, and we have to take new ideas and we've got to integrate them into that. And this is where you're doing the deep diving. This is where you're really unpacking your idea and saying, well, can this idea work? How does it work? What are the connection points in that? If I'm, as an example, I want to take my, just as a simple example, I want to take something that's on a manual and I want to put it online. And we often see this, and we saw this with what's happened in this whole period of everyone now having to learn online, is everyone just planted on a one-dimensional screen. There wasn't any creativity in how do I take those principles and how do I do it in a way that engages people, and really think about it. And if you look at this phase, this is where your thinker who really drills down into the detail, who takes inspiration and hooks it up with the practical and finds the faults and finds what could not work, because that's also an important phase. Your visionary is someone who drive the team through this process. We have the innovators, also very much a problem solver in this phase. So the incubation is really important, and I think I've often seen it, and I've been responsible for it myself, is often we are in such a rush to get an output, we don't give enough time for that incubation to happen, and for us to really understand our idea and how it fits in and how we can use it, and does it need to be combined with another idea. And unfortunately, this phase isn't just a few steps, it's an open-ended process, and even when you have a lot of people in that, it's when everyone is looking introvertedly, trying to understand it, trying to make connections. There might be a lot of disequilibrium between the team. There might be a lot of arguments, and this is not necessarily a bad thing. It actually is helping you strengthen and incubate that idea to a more refined level. So incubation would be, okay, I need to take this textbook and I need to create something that's where I don't have a facilitator in a face-to-face environment. How can I do it? What else is out there? I've got an idea that I want to create it into something more experiential. I want to explore virtual reality. I think it would be great if people could put on a set of glasses and they could actually experience it like it's in a classroom. And then you go and investigate that, and you go and your thinker might be someone who's sitting from the technology side, who comes in and says, well, you know how much a pair of Oculus glasses are. Have you thought about that? So even though it feels like a bit of a step that you're taking backwards, these are all important in terms of incubating and refining the idea. So I'm going to move next into illumination. And this is once you've really dug deep and you feel that, you know what, I think we could really do something good if we took our content and we actually got Google Classroom, and they've got this great cardboard set of glasses, and we can source a developer, and we actually get people to do some of those exercises in this virtual reality, but using items that are cost effective. And we start designing the specs out of this. We start looking at how will this happen. I mean, this is where you're still using your thinker. This is where your artist comes in with new ways of how you do it. This is where your producer and your maker comes in. These are the people who are actually going to start taking that idea, that refined idea, and putting it into specifications and how it can happen and how potential obstacles can be overcome. So this is where the energy starts picking up. People see a light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know if that's a train or a genuine light, but usually if you're having those nudges and you're getting more positive feedback than negative feedback, you know you're on the right track. So finally, we ended off with experimentation and evolution. This could be, you can really break this down. So I've obviously consolidated from a time point of view, but this is where you build your prototypes. This is where you start taking simple prototypes of what you've done. So you might not want to go into a full technology development. You might want to put this into a role play to get people's feedback and to see how it works and see what the connection points are, and then go into full development and then get feedback. So this is about prototyping. This is about iterative development. This is very much where your producer, your maker comes in, and your artist who also creates things. I just want to say that the visionary and some of the other creative thinkers still come into this process, and maybe through a guiding and a leadership and a bounce back to see what's being produced, they confirm how the team that's taking it into production is working around this. So that's the final phase. And now that I've shared those 4 phases, we're going to do something experiential with you. So I'm going to hand it over to Simon.
Cool. So yeah, this is obviously you want tools to be creative. This is one we use at Game to Change, where we sit down with a client and we kind of just throw out ideas onto a whiteboard and kind of see what sticks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get everyone involved in this. So Daniela has lovely linked you to the link. All you have to do again is click it in your Zoom window. You're going to click on the chat, you're going to click the link, and it's going to pop you onto the screen here. And what we're going to do is just simply going to play around a bit and kind of mess with the board. So what you can do is you can drag the pictures around. You can also then start drawing. So on the left-hand side, you can see that you have a whole bunch of tools. There's a pencil tool. So if you want to start drawing and maybe making some links between, maybe is the research equaling what the solution is? There's quite a lot of things you can do. And so this is a really nice kind of creative tool. So things we do is like we'll source images, we'll pull them from the internet, and then we'll drag them onto the whiteboard. So at the end of the experience, we kind of have this huge kind of like messy situation, but it does work because it does kind of create people and let them inspire. So we can actually try and start playing around and think, well, where would things go? Like, where would the thinker go? Where would the adventure go? So feel free to like place them where you think it might be in this overarching curve. Like, is the dreamer research? And Deirdre has kind of given you some hints already when we got into the 4 stages, but it's very possible that the dreamer might start thinking of new research after the solutions have come into play. They never stop dreaming, so they think of maybe a new product afterwards. Essentially, yep, the thinker perfectly can go probably between the observe and understanding and trying to break that gap. I think the producer is very much going to be sort of just involved in everything, I want to say. I mean, predominantly, they probably start doing things once the design principles come in, but really they're responsible for a lot of this whole process.
Great.
Your thoughts, Deirdre?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really interesting. I think everyone's getting it on tap. And I think, when you're doing this exercise, think about your own teams and the people you work with. And even if you are a freelancer, you can think of your clients and because we collaborate a lot with people. So where can you leverage creativity with other people in your process to help you maybe overcome some challenges, some of those creative challenges? Who could you look at also bringing in? When you've hit, if you look in terms of finding ideas for inspiration, maybe you're brilliant at taking an idea and making it happen, but who could you bounce ideas off for inspiration or new ways of thinking? Or who could you partner with around that? So it's just really interesting once you start doing this exercise, just to start also plotting it out in your own mind in terms of different thinking styles and and how you can use them. And I mean, we've used the mood meter because we've spoken about it, but you could even do it if you're doing Addy. You could sort of plot different creativity. There's different types of creativity that can be used. If you use design thinking, you know, there's stages there. So this really allows you to see how you can leverage people and your own strengths in coming up with better ideas and making them happen. Cool. So yeah, I think that's spot on. I see there's lots of drawing happen.
We have made a bit of a mess with this.
But that looks great. So yeah, this is just a really fun tool we wanted to bring in the session. It's Mural. We'll share the links with you. It's a great way. It's kind of like having a classroom and people draw on a board and put sticky notes up. And it just brings engagement.
Okay, well, we'll leave that up for people to start playing, but let's get back to the presentation. Up next, I think we have Daniela, who's going to guide us through the 7 creative hacks. So we talked a lot about the design process, but how do I be inspired to think creatively? Is that the thing?
So I think the biggest thing is, obviously it can be a bit overwhelming when you're actually following a process, and sometimes you get a creative block and you just can't push through an idea or a problem or a solution. And so these are just some hacks that we've put together just to help you kind of get some ideas flowing, and specifically within the team, to get your team creative together. So we're going to go through each one briefly. The first one is reverse brainstorming. This is quite interesting as it takes a different aspect to normal brainstorming. So brainstorming, you would kind of jot down a whole bunch of ideas. This one, instead of just doing good solutions, you're going to flip it and you're going to come up with bad solutions to your problem. So it is a 2-step process where you're going to transform the bad solution into a good solution. So an example would be is if you want to make teamwork more effective, some of the bad solutions would be to kind of put a wall between all your team members that they never meet each other, or you split them into 5 different buildings. And then what you would do is you would take those bad solutions and you would transform them into good solutions. So from that, we could say, okay, we need everyone to be collaborative. The space needs to be open, and there needs to be a common space where people can get together and discuss ideas and solutions. The second one is the 6 thinking hats. And I think most of us have kind of heard about this or even used it. And it's really about wearing a metaphorical hat. And each hat represents a different way of thinking. So for example, if you're wearing the devil's advocate hat, your job is to really consider the project's limitations and challenges. It sometimes is uncomfortable to kind of have a very narrow view of a solution, but what it does is the different extremes help teams explore a project or idea fully. The third one is forced connections. So this is really about taking 2 unrelated ideas and combining them to come up with a new concept. So where this has happened is, for example, with the Apple Watch, the Swiss Army knife, a smartphone, even a sofa bed. So it's taking 2 things and combining them and either coming up with a combined product or a combined concept. And we have a game that we actually designed to facilitate this kind of process, and it's linked with 2 dice, and you roll the 2 dice, and the one dice tells you how many blocks to move inward in the spiral, and the second dice tells you how many to move outwards. So for example, if we land on games and escape, for me, the first thing that comes together is escape rooms. So obviously you're just trying to get your team or yourself to get completely unrelated concepts and put them together as one. And it just allows you to think more creatively and think out of the box. Sometimes things will be really silly and very out there, but it's just nice to get out of a creative rut.
And Daniela, I wanted to also say that you could even use it if you're facing a problem and you can't solve a problem. It might just take you away from the problem or give a new angle of how to address a problem.
Definitely. The fourth one is picture association. This is quite nice, and I personally like it because I like narratives and themes and storytelling when it comes to products and solutions. So if you're quite stuck, you can research a stock image that's linked to your topic. And what you do is you and your team develop a story around it. So, for example, this is a dog or a wolf gazing at the night sky, and you could be thinking, Does the dog secretly want to be an astronaut, or perhaps a story about a space dog? And what this allows is just for you to be very creative and use visual stimulus, which obviously uses your creative side of your brain to come up with new ideas and themes and narratives. The fifth technique is Scamper. This is a very process-driven technique as well, and we have the mnemonics each relate to a specific process method. So the first one would be substitute. So within your product, what would happen if you substituted X for Y? If you want to combine something, what would happen if we combine two aspects of our solution together? You know, what would happen if we needed to adapt it to a different context? What would we have to change, or what would become irrelevant? We could then modify it to say, what could we modify to make it more valuable? Or what other uses can the applications have? So I think this is also very applicable to like smartphones. Originally, it was just to dial or to call. Now we have all of these aspects of our smartphone, and that's just how it's been modified over time. The P is to put it to another use. So what other uses can your solution have? You then can eliminate aspects, and I think that's quite important when you're analyzing your solution to, are there any completely irrelevant functionalities? Is there anything that has no function to the user, and to just eliminate that from your product? You then have reverse, and so this is how could we reorganize the project to make it more effective? So this is about digging quite a lot deeper into your issues and the new possibilities.
Yeah.
Then,
I think this would also be great when you're doing your incubation, when you're really letting that idea like develop fully.
yeah, and analyzing it. The next one is zero draft, and this is really nice in the initial stages of your project, where you just need to get all of your ideas onto paper. So it's just about taking notes, and I know we at Game to Change love to use very colorful post-its everywhere, and just writing down everything you know about your subject. You then go on to everything you need to know but don't currently know. And I think an important aspect is to reflect on, why is the subject important? Why are we doing this? Why do we need to create a solution? And then anything else that you want to write down about it. So I think because it is a lot of free writing, don't be concerned if it looks really messy and unfocused. The goal is just to get it past that initial block and in the early stages of your project. The final one is alter egos. This is a really fun exercise, and it does bring a lot of play into a creative technique. So what you do is you adopt an alter ego. It can be fictional, a real character or a famous character, and you basically embody the qualities that that person might have and view your project and your solution within that hat. So we've also developed a little game here with 2 dice as well. So the 1 dice will be the horizontal axis, and the 2nd dice will be the vertical axis, and that will then allow you to land on a person. So you kind of look at it as, you know, how would Catwoman go about positioning your brand? Or what would Steve Jobs do to improve your communication? Or how would Taylor Swift use your core message to target millennials? So these are really interesting ways that you can get a different perspective on your project, and it gives a bit of role play and fun to the process.
So thanks, Daniela. I'm sure everyone's can take one of those things out from there. So I think just to wrap up the webinar is, we obviously are running these 4 sets of webinars that cover our 4 diamonds: discover, create, prototype, and develop, implement, and evaluate. And what we're doing is giving a taste of a program that we're launching the beginning of 2021. It's called our Excellence in Learning Design. We've looked at a strong focus on each of the areas, from discover, which is your first diamond, which would be your analysis. You'll see there's 4 modules in terms of taking good instructional and learning design principles. We embed it with some design thinking in terms of that. And then we go into create, and this is where we do a lot more around creative techniques and how do you actually apply that into your content requirements, your journey maps, your learning design frameworks. And then finally, we've got the last 2 is prototype and develop, which is how do you paper prototype, which is going to be our next teaser webinar on the 5th of November. and then finally implement and evaluate your project. So we're offering this 14-module program in the beginning of 2021. We are going to use some of our own experiences in applying it to learning design. We're going to be showcasing how we've applied this to designing a gamified learning experience, and show you practically step by step through the way. So this is just a teaser of something bigger that's coming. And on that note, we're going to wrap up now. So the good news is we're going to send you a link where you can actually access the toolkit. The toolkit will have these particular tools we've been chatting about that you can apply. There's a little bit more detail in it. There's more detail around where to do the creative thinking quiz, where a little bit more detail around each of the stages of the creative process. And then we'll also include some of our games that we've put here for the creativity hacks. So we'll be sending through with a follow-up email. You can go onto the link. There'll also be the webinar recording on there. You can download all of that. And then if you really enjoyed today's session, you can chat to us about our Excellence in Learning Design series. But if you want to take it a little bit slower, on the 5th of November, we are doing our next webinar, which is really around paper prototyping for learning design. And this will be held in a similar format to today, with also tips and techniques. So we obviously can't go into full development. So paper prototyping is a great way for us to test our ideas and to get user feedback. So we'll send you a link of that. But I just want to thank everyone for joining us and sharing their presence. I want to thank Daniela and Simon for also sharing your creative insights today. And we're going to just hang around. So if you want to put any questions on the chat, you can, or you can be in touch with us afterwards and we'll be sending you links. So I hope you have a good rest of your Thursday.